What happens when a desperate, minimum-wage waitress looks a ruthless syndicate boss dead in the eyes and threatens his life? Most people would say she just signed her own death warrant. When 22-year-old Carmen Hollins shattered a $500 bottle of Cabernet over the lap of Chicago's most feared underworld figure, the entire restaurant held its breath, waiting for the gunshot. But Gabriel Moreau didn't reach for his weapon. He didn't order his men to drag her into the alley. Instead, he did something that shifted the balance of the entire city's criminal empire. Buckle up, because this true story of grit, danger, and forbidden obsession will leave you completely speechless. The Velvet Room was the kind of restaurant where the chandeliers cost more than the combined annual salaries of the entire waitstaff. Tucked away on a discreet corner of Chicago's Rush Street, it catered to politicians, celebrities, and the kind of men who carried their power like a loaded weapon. Carmen Hollins hated every inch of the place. She hated the stiff, suffocating corset of her uniform. She hated the way the wealthy patrons snapped their fingers at her as if she were a disobedient dog. And most of all, she hated the fact that she desperately needed the job. It was a blistering Tuesday night in late November. The city was already frozen solid, the wind howling off Lake Michigan, but inside the restaurant kitchen, it was a sweltering 90 degrees. Carmen stood by the stainless steel prep station, pressing the heel of her hand against her aching temple. Her shift had started 9 hours ago. Her feet, encased in cheap black flats, felt like they were bleeding. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the crushing weight of the math constantly running through her head. Rent was due in 4 days, $1,400. Utilities, $200. And then there was Toby. Her younger brother had always been a magnet for bad decisions, but his latest mistake had a price tag of $48,000, owed to men who did not send collection letters. They sent broken fingers. Carmen. Table 4. A panicked voice hissed. It was Arthur Pendleton, the floor manager. His normally flushed face was completely drained of color. He looked like a man who had just been told his parachute was packed with dirty laundry. Table 4 is Jenna's section, Carmen said, wiping her hands on her apron. Jenna is in the bathroom having a panic attack, Arthur stammered, his eyes darting toward the heavy mahogany doors that led to the main dining room. Gabriel Moreau just walked in. He bypassed the reservation list, took Table 4, and brought 3 of his associates. I need someone out there who won't drop a tray from trembling. Go. Carmen felt a cold stone drop in her stomach. Everyone in Chicago knew the name Gabriel Moreau. On paper, he was the CEO of Moreau Logistics, a massive shipping conglomerate. In reality, he controlled the ports, the underground casinos, and a vast network of illicit trade that stretched from the Midwest to the East Coast. He was 32, ruthlessly intelligent, and possessed a reputation for startling violence. Taking a deep breath, Carmen loaded a silver tray with 4 glasses of ice water and a bottle of sparkling Pellegrino. Fine, but I'm taking Jenna's tips for the night. She pushed through the swinging doors, leaving the chaotic noise of the kitchen for the hushed, ambient glow of the dining room. Table 4 was a secluded booth in the back, shrouded in shadows. As Carmen approached, the temperature in the room seemed to drop. Gabriel Moreau sat in the center of the booth. He wasn't overly massive, but he carried an aura of absolute, terrifying authority. He wore a charcoal bespoke suit that fit perfectly over his broad shoulders, his dark hair slicked back, his sharp jawline set in a rigid line. His dark eyes were fixed on the man sitting across from him, a balding, heavily perspiring associate. 2 massive bodyguards, one of whom was Stellan Mercer, Gabriel's infamous enforcer, stood like stone statues a few feet away. I don't care about the Port Authority's new regulations, Gabriel was saying, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that cut through the soft jazz playing over the speakers. I pay you to find blind spots, Arthur. If the shipment doesn't clear customs by midnight, I will personally ensure you never clear a solid meal again." The balding man swallowed hard. "Yes, Mr. Moreau, I understand." Carmen stepped forward, keeping her face perfectly blank. "Good evening, gentlemen. Can I start you off with some—" "Not now," Gabriel snapped, not even bothering to look at her. He waved a hand dismissively, the heavy gold watch on his wrist catching the dim light. "Bring the 62 Barolo and leave us alone." Carmen bit the inside of her cheek. "Of course, sir." She retreated to the bar, her blood beginning to simmer. She retrieved the vintage wine, a bottle that cost more than her monthly rent, and returned to the table. The tension at the booth had escalated. The balding man was practically shaking. As Carmen reached over to place the wine glasses on the table, the balding man flinched at something Gabriel said, his elbow jerking backward. He collided hard with Carmen's hip. The silver tray tipped. Time seemed to slow down. The heavy crystal glasses slid, the expensive bottle of Barolo toppled, and a wave of deep crimson wine splashed directly onto the lap of Gabriel Moreau's immaculate charcoal suit. The entire restaurant went dead silent. The clinking of silverware stopped. The soft hum of conversation vanished. Even the jazz music seemed to fade into the background. Gabriel looked down at his ruined suit. Then very slowly he lifted his head and locked eyes with Carmen. The sheer, unadulterated menace in his gaze was enough to make a grown man fall to his knees and beg. He stood up abruptly, towering over her. His chair scraped violently against the hardwood floor. "Are you completely incompetent?" he roared, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "Do you have any idea how much this suit costs, you stupid little girl?" Carmen's heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She was terrified. She was exhausted. She was drowning in debt, worried sick about her brother, and completely fed up with being treated like garbage by men who had more money than basic human decency. Something inside her, a fragile, frayed wire that had been holding her together for months, suddenly snapped. "I am perfectly aware of how to pour wine, sir," Carmen said, her voice shaking slightly, not from fear, but from an overwhelming surge of adrenaline. "Then explain this," Gabriel shouted, stepping closer, his imposing frame casting a dark shadow over her. "You worthless, clumsy! Shout at me again and I'll end you." The words left Carmen's mouth before she could stop them. They were loud, crisp, and rang out with crystal-clear defiance. The silence that followed was suffocating. Behind Gabriel, Stellan Mercer instantly slipped a hand inside his tailored jacket, resting it on the grip of a concealed firearm. The balding man at the table looked as if he was going to pass out. Arthur Pendleton, watching from the kitchen doors, actually made the sign of the cross. Gabriel froze. His dark eyes widened fractionally, a flicker of genuine shock piercing through his rage. He stared down at the 22-year-old waitress in the stained apron, her chin jutted out, her eyes blazing with an almost psychotic level of defiance. She was trembling, but she wasn't backing down. She looked like a cornered stray cat ready to take on a wolf. For 10 agonizing seconds, nobody moved. Carmen braced herself for the backhand or the bullet. She mentally apologized to her brother. Then Gabriel Moreau did the unthinkable. The hard, murderous lines of his face began to soften. The corners of his mouth twitched, and then he let out a low, rumbling chuckle that sounded entirely out of place in the terrified room. He raised a hand, gesturing sharply to Stellan. The enforcer slowly removed his hand from his jacket. "Well," Gabriel murmured, leaning in slightly, his voice dropping to a smooth, dangerous whisper meant only for her. "That is the first time in 5 years anyone has had the spine to threaten my life, over a spilled drink, no less." He didn't break eye contact as he reached into his jacket, pulled out a sleek leather money clip, and peeled off a stack of crisp $100 bills. He dropped them onto the wet table. It was easily $2,000. "For the dry cleaning," Gabriel said, a strange, dark amusement dancing in his eyes. He pulled a heavy, embossed black business card from his pocket and slid it across the table toward her. "When they fire you tonight, keep this." Without another word, Gabriel turned on his heel and strode out of the restaurant, his massive bodyguards following closely behind in a tight V formation. Carmen stood frozen amidst the wreckage of broken glass and spilled wine, the black business card seemingly burning a hole into the white tablecloth. Arthur fired her before the front doors had even closed behind the Mafia boss. "Are you insane?" Arthur had hissed, dragging Carmen into his small, cramped office. "Do you know who that was? You just threatened the head of the Moreau Syndicate. You're lucky you aren't bleeding out on my Italian marble floors. Get your things and get out, Carmen. You are a liability. I never want to see you in this zip code again." Carmen didn't argue. The adrenaline had rapidly drained from her system, leaving behind a cold, sickening dread. She changed out of her uniform, grabbed her threadbare winter coat, and walked out into the biting Chicago wind. The walk to the L train was usually a 20-minute blur of exhaustion, but tonight, every shadow looked like a hitman. Every idling car sounded like a getaway vehicle. What had she done? She had let her temper jeopardize not only her own life, but potentially Toby's as well. When she finally reached her cramped, run-down apartment in the Pilsen neighborhood, she locked the door, slid the deadbolt, and pushed a heavy wooden chair under the handle. She collapsed onto a cheap sofa, pulling the black business card from her pocket. It was minimalist. Heavy cardstock. Just a name, Gabriel Moreau, and a phone number. No address, no job title. The next 3 days were a masterclass in psychological torture. Carmen couldn't sleep. She jumped at every creak of the floorboards. But nobody kicked her door down. Nobody grabbed her off the street. Instead, the intimidation was silent, precise, and utterly terrifying. On Wednesday morning, she looked out her smudged window to see a black Cadillac Escalade parked directly across the street. It sat there for 6 hours, the engine idling, the tinted windows impenetrable. On Thursday, she went to the local bodega to buy cheap ramen noodles. When she went to pay, the clerk, an older man named Hector, who usually chatted her ear off, pale and sweating, pushed her $5 bill back. It's been taken care of, Miss Hollins," he stammered, looking nervously towards the front door. Carmen turned. Standing outside, leaning against a street lamp and casually smoking a cigarette, was Stellan Mercer. He gave her a polite, chilling nod. By Friday, Carmen was losing her mind. The $2,000 Gabriel had left on the table sat on her kitchen counter, mocking her. She hadn't touched it. It felt like blood money, a trap waiting to spring. But worse than the stalking was the impending doom regarding Toby. His deadline with the loan sharks was fast approaching, and without her restaurant job, she had absolutely zero income. Friday night, the climax of her paranoia arrived. Carmen heard a heavy, sickening thud against her front door, followed by the screeching of tires. Grabbing a heavy iron skillet from the stove, she crept to the door and peered through the peephole. Nothing. She unbolted the door and cracked it open. Her brother Toby was slumped against the doorframe, his face a bruised, bloody mess. His left arm was hanging at an unnatural angle. "Toby!" "Oh!" Carmen screamed, dropping the skillet and dragging his dead weight inside. She locked the door frantically and knelt beside him on the scuffed linoleum floor. "Carmen!" Toby groaned, coughing wetly. "I'm sorry. The Volkov guys. They said my time was up." Pinned to Toby's blood-stained jacket was a crisp white envelope. Carmen ripped it open with trembling hands. Inside was a typed note, concise and terrifying. "Not my work, but I can make them stop. Call the number." It wasn't a threat. It was a demonstration of power. Gabriel Moreau had been watching her. He knew exactly what kind of trouble she was in. He knew about the Volkov Bratva, the ruthless Russian syndicate that Toby had foolishly borrowed money from. Gabrielle had let them beat her brother to show her that there were worse monsters in Chicago than him. Tears of fury and sheer desperation streamed down Carmen's face. She grabbed her phone, dialing the number on the black card. It rang only once. "You took your time, Miss Hollins." Gabriel's smooth, dark voice echoed through the receiver. "I need an ambulance for my brother, and I need this to end," Carmen choked out, her voice hard despite the tears. "An ambulance is already pulling onto your street. A private medical team. They won't ask questions," Gabriel replied calmly. "As for ending it, that requires a conversation, in person. My driver is waiting downstairs." "You orchestrated this," she accused, glaring at the door as the distant wail of sirens grew closer. "I merely stepped out of the way to let natural consequences occur," Gabriel corrected. "I am offering you a lifeline. I suggest you take it." 10 minutes later, Toby was being loaded into a private, unmarked medical transport van by tight-lipped EMTs. Carmen watched them drive away, her heart aching, before turning her attention to the black Escalade waiting by the curb. Stellan Mercer stood by the open rear door. She climbed in. There was no turning back now. The Moreau Holdings building was a towering glass and steel monolith in the heart of the loop, a stark contrast to the crumbling brick of Carmen's neighborhood. Stellan escorted her past the bewildered security guards, through a sprawling lobby of Italian marble and brushed steel, and into a private, wood-paneled elevator that required a retinal scan to operate. Carmen felt entirely out of place in her worn jeans and oversized thrift store sweater. She crossed her arms defensively, trying to suppress the violent trembling in her hands. She was about to bargain with the devil, and she didn't even know what she had to trade. The elevator chimed, opening into a sprawling penthouse office that overlooked the glittering skyline of Chicago. The room was aggressively masculine. Dark leather, dark wood, heavy bookshelves, and a massive mahogany desk. Gabriel Moreau stood by floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the city holding a crystal tumbler of amber liquid. He was out of the suit, wearing a black tailored dress shirt, with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, revealing intricate, dark tattoos winding up his forearms. "Sit, Carmen," he commanded softly, without turning around. She didn't move. "I prefer to stand." Gabriel turned, a faint smirk playing on his lips. Still defiant. "Good. I was worried the Volkovs might have scared it out of you." He walked over to his desk and leaned against the edge, crossing his arms. "Let's skip the pleasantries. Toby owes the Russians $48,600, plus interest. They intend to kill him by Monday, and they intend to sell you to a trafficking ring in Eastern Europe to recoup their losses." Carmen's breath hitched, the room suddenly spinning. She grabbed the back of a leather guest chair to steady herself. "Well, why do you care? Why are you having me followed? Why did you pay my rent yesterday?" "I didn't pay your rent," Gabriel said, taking a slow sip of his drink. "I bought the building. It's much more efficient." Carmen stared at him, bewildered by the sheer scale of his wealth and audacity. "What do you want from me?" Gabriel set his glass down, his expression hardening into something predatory and deeply serious. "The Volkovs are expanding. They are testing my borders, encroaching on my ports. They think I'm weak right now, because my uncle recently passed, leaving the syndicate in a state of transition. I need to strike them hard, but I need a distraction. I need them to believe I am unfocused, reckless, and distracted by personal matters." He stepped closer to her, his height and presence overwhelming. "I live in a world of sycophants, assassins, and calculated politicians. Everyone I date, everyone I bring into my inner circle, is heavily vetted, predictable, and part of the life. You are none of those things. You are a fiery, impulsive, desperate civilian who had the sheer audacity to threaten the head of the Moreau family over a ruined shirt. So you want to use me as... what? A decoy?" "An obsession," Gabriel corrected, his dark eyes locking onto hers, making her skin prickle. "I want the city, and more importantly the Volkovs, to believe that I have lost my mind over a nobody from Pilsen. I want them to think I'm making mistakes, leaving my businesses vulnerable because I'm too busy parading an unpredictable, unhinged waitress around high society events. While they are busy laughing at my apparent midlife crisis and moving their pieces into the open, I will slaughter them. Carmen swallowed hard, trying to process the magnitude of his plan. You want me to be your fake girlfriend. I want you to be a spectacular, chaotic nuisance, Gabriel said smoothly. You will move into my estate in Lake Forest. You will attend every gala, every underground poker game, and every family dinner on my arm. You will be loud, demanding, and utterly out of place. You will throw tantrums, demand expensive things, and act like a woman who has completely bewitched me. You will be the Trojan horse that makes my enemies underestimate me. And if I refuse, then you walk out of that door, and by Monday, you and Toby are dead. It's that simple. Gabriel's voice wasn't cruel. It was merely stating a fact. And if I agree, she fired back, finding her voice, what do I get? Gabriel walked to his desk, picked up a heavy manila folder, and tossed it onto the leather surface. Your brother's debt to the Volkovs is transferred to me and instantly forgiven. His medical bills are paid. Furthermore, he will be placed on a private jet to a secure facility in Switzerland where he can recover and receive counseling for his gambling addiction, safe from any retaliation. And when this is over, in approximately 3 months, you will receive $2 million deposited into an offshore account and a clean slate. Carmen's heart stopped. $2 million. It was a sum so large it didn't even sound real to her. It was freedom. Total, absolute freedom. But she wasn't stupid. What's the catch? Men like you don't give away $2 million just for someone to play dress-up. Gabriel's eyes darkened, the temperature in the room plummeting. The catch, Carmen, is that the Volkovs are not fools. When they realize what I'm doing, when they realize you are the distraction, they will come for you. If you slip up, if you break character and reveal that this is a setup, they will torture you until you tell them my exact plans. You are walking into the crossfire of a Mafia war. The danger is very real. He stepped up to her, so close she could smell his expensive cologne, a mix of bergamot, cedar, and something distinctly metallic. I can protect you while you are by my side, but if you panic, if you run, I cannot save you. So I need to know, right now, do you have the spine to look death in the face and smile, or was that threat in the restaurant just a fluke? Carmen looked up at the towering, dangerous man before her. She thought of Toby, lying broken on her floor. She thought of the relentless, crushing weight of poverty, the fear of eviction, the sheer helplessness of being at the bottom of the food chain. She took a slow, steadying breath. I'm going to need a wardrobe budget, she said, her voice deadpan. If I'm going to be your unhinged trophy girlfriend, I am not wearing knockoffs. A slow, wicked smile spread across Gabrielle Moreau's face. It was a smile that promised absolute chaos. Stellan, Gabriel called out, and the office door immediately opened. Take Miss Hollins to her new quarters at the estate. Have the stylist arrive at dawn. We have a gala tomorrow night, and she needs to make an entrance they will never forget. As Stellan gestured for her to follow, Carmen turned back to Gabriel. By the way, she said, raising an eyebrow, I expect hazard pay if anyone else spills wine on me. Gabriel actually laughed, a rich, genuine sound that echoed in the cavernous office. Noted, mia cara. Carmen walked to the elevator, her knees shaking, but her head held high. She had walked into the building a desperate, broke waitress. She was walking out as the most dangerous liability in the Chicago underworld. The Moreau estate in Lake Forest was less of a home and more of a fortified palace of stone, glass, and iron. Nestled on 5 acres of private lakefront property, it was completely isolated from the prying eyes of the public. When Carmen woke up in a guest bedroom the size of her entire Pilsen apartment, the reality of her devil's bargain finally set in. Her brother was safe in Swiss airspace, and she was trapped in a gilded cage with Chicago's most dangerous predator. At exactly 7 in the morning, the heavy oak door swung open, and a severe-looking woman with perfectly coiffed silver hair marched in, followed by 3 assistants carrying garment bags. "I am Vivian," the woman announced, her accent a crisp, unidentifiable European blend. "Mr. Moreau informed me that we are dressing a civilian for the Winter Solstice Gala at the Drake Hotel tonight. We have exactly 10 hours to make you look like a woman who could bring the city's most ruthless syndicate boss to his knees. Get up." The transformation was grueling. Carmen was scrubbed, polished, plucked, and painted. By 5 o'clock, she stood in front of a floor-to-ceiling mirror, genuinely unable to recognize the reflection staring back at her. Her messy, split-ended hair had been transformed into a sleek, cascading waterfall of dark waves. The exhaustion circles under her eyes were gone, replaced by sharp, smoky makeup that made her eyes look dangerous and feline. But it was the dress that stole the breath from her lungs. It was a custom-fitted gown of liquid crimson silk. It clung to her curves like a second skin, featuring a plunging neckline and a thigh-high slit that demanded attention. It was scandalous, incredibly expensive, and entirely inappropriate for the conservative, old-money crowd that would be attending the gala. "It's too much," Carmen whispered, her hands trembling as she touched the silk. "They're going to stare at me like I'm a cheap novelty." "That," a deep voice rumbled from the doorway, "is entirely the point." Carmen turned. Gabriel stood leaning against the doorframe, wearing a midnight blue tuxedo that fit his broad frame with lethal precision. His dark eyes swept over her, taking in the crimson gown, the diamonds dripping from her ears, and the newfound fire in her posture. For a fraction of a second, the cold, calculating Mafia boss vanished, replaced by a man who looked genuinely struck by lightning. He cleared his throat, the mask slipping flawlessly back into place. The Volkovs pride themselves on tradition and subtlety. "Tonight, you are going to be the loudest, most obnoxious, and most distracting thing in that ballroom. You are going to cling to my arm, you are going to complain about the champagne, and you are going to make it painfully obvious that I am blinded by lust." Carmen lifted her chin. "I'm a waitress, Gabriel. I've spent 3 years dealing with entitled rich people. I know exactly how to play a spoiled brat." The ride to the Gold Coast in the back of the armored Maybach was silent, fraught with an electric tension. When they finally pulled up to the glittering entrance of the Drake Hotel, flashbulbs erupted. The paparazzi were out in full force, and the sight of Gabriel Moreau, a man who fiercely guarded his privacy, stepping out with an unknown, stunning woman in a scandalous red dress, sent the crowd into a frenzy. Gabriel wrapped a heavy, possessive arm around Carmen's waist, pulling her flush against his side. "Smile, mia cara," he murmured into her ear, his breath warm against her skin. "Let the games begin." The moment they stepped into the grand ballroom, the air grew thick. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Eyes darted towards them, wide with shock and veiled contempt. The room was a sea of black, white, and silver. Carmen, in her blazing red gown, was a walking siren. "Gabriel," a smooth, heavily accented voice called out. The crowd parted seamlessly as a tall, imposing man with ice-blue eyes and silver hair approached. He wore a traditional black tuxedo, but the air around him felt entirely devoid of warmth. This was Nikolai Volkov, the head of the Russian syndicate. "Nikolai," Gabriel replied, his voice a perfect, casual drawl. "I didn't expect to see you mingling with the politicians tonight." "We all must make appearances," Nikolai smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. His gaze shifted entirely to Carmen, sweeping over her with a mixture of disgust and sharp curiosity. "And who is this vibrant creature? A new associate?" Carmen didn't wait for Gabriel to answer. Channeling every obnoxious, wealthy customer she had ever served, she let out an exaggerated, bored sigh and leaned heavily against Gabriel's chest. "Oh, please don't talk business tonight, baby," Carmen whined, her voice loud enough to carry to the neighboring tables. She reached up, carelessly running a manicured finger down the lapel of Gabriel's custom tuxedo. You promised me we were going to look at the yacht brochures. This party is incredibly stiff, and my feet are already killing me." A collective gasp echoed from the nearby socialites. Nobody, absolutely nobody, spoke to Gabrielle Moreau like that, let alone interrupted a conversation with a rival boss. Nikolai's jaw tightened. He looked at Gabriel, waiting for the inevitable explosion, waiting for Gabriel to backhand the insolent girl. Instead, Gabriel looked down at Carmen, his eyes softening into a look of utter, sickening devotion. He caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "Of course, my love. We can leave for the marina the moment you get bored. Whatever you want." Nikolai's ice-blue eyes widened a fraction. The Russian boss took a step back, his mind visibly racing. He was watching the ruthless, untouchable Gabrielle Moreau bend completely to the whims of an impulsive, garish girl. It was the ultimate display of weakness. "Well," Nikolai said smoothly, a predatory gleam entering his eyes, "I will leave you to your distractions, Gabrielle. Enjoy the evening." As Nikolai walked away, Carmen kept the bored smile plastered on her face. But beneath the silk of her dress, her heart was hammering against her ribs like a jackhammer. "Flawless," Gabriel murmured against her hair as he guided her towards the bar. He swallowed it whole. "He thinks I'm compromised." "I told you," Carmen whispered back, her smile never wavering. "I know how to play the game." 3 weeks passed. The charade escalated from high society galas to underground casino nights, exclusive art auctions, and private dinners. The Chicago gossip columns were entirely obsessed with the Moreau mystery woman, while the criminal underworld whispered that Gabriel had lost his edge. Behind closed doors at the Lake Forest estate, however, the dynamic was shifting. The strict boundaries of their business arrangement were beginning to blur. Gabriel found himself lingering in the kitchen when Carmen came down for coffee in her oversized pajamas. He started teaching her how to shoot in the soundproofed basement firing range, his chest pressed against her back, his large hands guiding her smaller ones as she learned to handle a 9mm Glock. Carmen was terrifyingly good at it. "You don't flinch," Gabriel noted one late evening, watching her put 3 consecutive rounds through the center mass of a paper target. "When you grow up in Pilsen with a brother who owes money to everyone," Carmen said, lowering the weapon and popping the magazine out with practiced ease, "flinching gets you killed. You learn to stay completely still until the threat passes." Gabriel stared at her, the harsh fluorescent lights of the range casting deep shadows over his face. He reached out, his thumb gently brushing a smudge of gunpowder from her cheek. The touch was entirely unnecessary, unscripted, and entirely real. Carmen's breath caught in her throat. The air between them thickened, vibrating with a heavy, unspoken magnetism that had absolutely nothing to do with the Volkovs. "We have a dinner tonight," Gabriel said, his voice dropping an octave, pulling his hand away reluctantly. "Gibson's Bar and Steakhouse, a private room. The Volkovs requested a sit-down to discuss port boundaries. It's a trap, of course." Carmen nodded, her professional mask sliding back on. "What's my role?" "You are going to be a nuisance," Gabriel instructed. "You will demand a specific vintage of wine, you will complain about the temperature, and you will insist I pay attention to you instead of the negotiations. I need them frustrated and overconfident." The private dining room at Gibson's was opulent, smelling of aged leather, expensive cigars, and sizzling prime rib. The tension, however, was thick enough to choke on. Nikolai Volkov sat across the round mahogany table, flanked by 2 massive enforcers, one of whom was a heavily scarred man named Victor. Carmen played her part brilliantly. For 45 minutes, she interrupted Nikolai, complained that her steak was overcooked, and practically sat in Gabriel's lap, whispering nonsense into his ear. Gabriel played the doting, distracted fool perfectly, dismissing Nikolai's aggressive demands with a wave of his hand. But then, the unexpected happened. "I need to use the powder room," Carmen announced loudly, standing up and smoothing down her black velvet dress. "Stellan will escort you," Gabriel said smoothly. I'm just going down the hall, baby, Carmen whined, rolling her eyes. I don't need a babysitter. It's embarrassing. Gabriel hesitated, a flicker of genuine concern crossing his features. But breaking character now would ruin weeks of work. Make it quick, Maya cara. No. Carmen stepped out of the private room and into the dimly lit, heavily carpeted hallway. She exhaled a long, shaky breath, letting the bratty persona drop for just a second to rub her aching temples. Suddenly, a heavy hand clamped down on her shoulder, spinning her around and slamming her violently against the oak-paneled wall. The breath left her lungs in a sharp gasp. It was Victor. The scarred Russian enforcer pressed his massive forearm against her collarbone, pinning her in place. The hallway was completely empty, the ambient noise of the main restaurant muffled by the thick doors. You are a very loud little bird, Victor sneered, his thick accent dripping with malice. He leaned in, his breath reeking of vodka and garlic, but loud birds are the easiest to shoot. Carmen's heart plummeted into her stomach. She remembered Gabriel's rule. Don't panic. She forced her breathing to slow, staring dead into Victor's dead, soulless eyes. Mister, Volkov is getting very tired of Gabriel's disrespect, Victor hissed, pressing harder against her windpipe. He sent me to give you a message. We know Toby is not in the ground. We know he is in Switzerland. Ice flooded Carmen's veins. They knew. The secure facility had been breached. Her leverage, her brother's safety, was gone. If Gabriel does not concede the southern shipping lanes, tonight, Victor whispered, pulling a razor-sharp combat knife from his jacket and pressing the flat of the blade against her cheek, I will personally fly to Geneva, and I will send Toby back to you in very small boxes. Do you understand, little bird? Terror screamed through her mind, but the girl who had survived the slums of Chicago, the girl who had threatened a Mafia boss over a spilled drink, refused to break. You're making a mistake, Victor, Carmen said, her voice eerily calm, devoid of the whiny pitch she had been using all night. Victor frowned, clearly confused by her lack of tears. What did you say? I said you're making a mistake, Carmen repeated, her eyes blazing with a dark, dangerous fire she didn't know she possessed. Because if you touch my brother, Gabriel won't just kill you. He will burn your entire syndicate to ash. He will gut you, and he will make Nikolai watch. You think I'm his weakness? I'm the only reason he hasn't slaughtered you all yet. I keep him calm. Victor's eyes widened, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his scarred face. She wasn't acting like a terrified civilian. She was talking like a queen of the underworld. Before Victor could process her words, the heavy door to the private dining room exploded open. Gabriel Moreau stood in the doorway. He wasn't the distracted, doting boyfriend anymore. The mask was completely gone. The look on his face was one of pure, unadulterated, apocalyptic violence. He didn't yell. He didn't issue a warning. He crossed the hallway in 2 massive strides. Victor barely had time to turn his head before Gabriel's hand clamped around the back of the Russian's neck, violently yanking him away from Carmen. With a sickening crunch that echoed down the corridor, Gabriel slammed Victor's face directly into the heavy brass sconce on the wall. Victor collapsed to the floor like a sack of dead weight, blood pooling instantly on the expensive carpet. Gabriel stood over the unconscious man, his chest heaving, his fists clenched tight enough to turn his knuckles stark white. Then he turned to Carmen. She was trembling against the wall, one hand resting on her bruised collarbone. Gabriel stepped toward her, his dark eyes frantically scanning her face, her neck, checking for cuts from the knife. He reached out, his large hands gently cupping her face. The sheer terror in his eyes betrayed everything he had been trying to hide for the past 3 weeks. Are you hurt? He demanded, his voice a ragged, desperate whisper. Carmen, look at me. Did he cut you? I'm fine, she breathed, her hands coming up to grip his wrists, grounding herself in his warmth. He didn't cut me. But Gabriel, They know about Toby. They know he's in Switzerland. Gabriel's jaw locked. The air around him turned to ice. He pulled her flush against his chest, wrapping his arms around her in a fiercely protective embrace that felt entirely too real to be part of the contract. "The charade is over," Gabriel whispered against her hair, his voice devoid of mercy. "They touched what is mine. Tonight, we go to war." The transition from a high society dinner to a full-scale tactical extraction took exactly 45 seconds. Gabriel didn't look back at Victor's bleeding, unconscious body on the carpet of Gibson's Bar and Steakhouse. He kept one arm firmly wrapped around Carmen's waist, practically carrying her as they moved swiftly through the kitchen exits. Stellan Mercer was already waiting in the alley, the armored Maybach's engine purring like a caged beast. "We are compromised," Gabriel snarled as he shoved Carmen into the back seat, sliding in right beside her. "The Volkovs hit the Swiss servers, initiate Protocol Winter, burn the southern warehouses, and call in the hounds." "Done, boss," Stellan replied, his voice completely devoid of panic as he floored the accelerator. The heavy vehicle tore out onto Rush Street, blending into the icy Chicago night. Carmen pressed her trembling hands against her thighs. The adrenaline was crashing, leaving her cold and nauseous. "Gabriel, Toby, if they have his location, they don't have him," Gabriel interrupted, his voice a low, soothing rumble that resonated in the cramped space. He turned to her, the dim streetlights catching the lethal, predatory gleam in his eyes. He didn't look like a CEO anymore. He looked primal. "I knew Nikolai would try to trace the funds the moment I paid off the loan sharks. Toby was never in Switzerland. That was a dummy file left for their hackers to find." Carmen gasped, the air rushing back into her lungs. "Where is he?" "Safe, in a private facility in northern Ontario, surrounded by 10 of my best men," Gabriel said, reaching out to grip her knee. His thumb traced a soothing circle over her skin. "I would never use your blood as bait, Carmen. Never." The sheer intensity of his gaze made her heart skip a beat. The boundaries of their transaction had completely dissolved. The way he looked at her, the feral, possessive heat in his eyes, wasn't an act for the rival syndicate. It was real. They didn't return to the Lake Forest estate. Instead, Stellan navigated the labyrinthine tunnels of Lower Wacker Drive, pulling into an unmarked subterranean concrete bunker that served as the Moreau Syndicate's nerve center. Inside, the atmosphere was electric. Dozens of men in dark tactical gear were moving with lethal efficiency, loading heavy weaponry and encrypting communication channels. Gabriel stripped off his tailored tuxedo jacket, tossing it aside, and unbuttoned his collar. "The Volkovs think I'm weak because I've been distracted by a woman." Gabriel addressed the room, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. The men instantly fell silent, turning to their leader with a fierce, unwavering loyalty that reminded Carmen of a wolf pack, zeroing in on their alpha. "They think they can threaten what is mine. Tonight, we remind them why we own this city. We don't just push them back, we eradicate them." A low murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Gabriel turned to Stellan. "Take out their money laundering fronts in River North. I want the O'Hare shipments intercepted and burned to the ground. And find the loan sharks who put Toby in the hospital. Bring them to the meatpacking district. They owe me a debt." Karma was a terrifying force, especially when wielded by Gabriel Moreau. Over the next 48 hours, the Chicago underworld was set ablaze. Carmen remained locked in the bunker's private quarters, watching the news monitors with a mixture of awe and horror. Unexplained fires decimated 3 of Nikolai Volkov's primary warehouses. A sudden, violent tax audit by tipped-off federal agents froze the Russian syndicate's offshore accounts, and the men who had broken Toby's arm? They were found handcuffed to a fence outside the 12th District Police Station, bruised, battered, and carrying a neatly typed ledger detailing every illegal loan they had ever issued. Justice had arrived, brutal and uncompromising. But a wounded animal is the most dangerous kind, and Nikolai Volkov was backed into a corner. On the 3rd night, the heavy metal door to Carmen's quarters opened. Gabriel stepped in, looking utterly exhausted. There was a smear of soot on his cheek, and his knuckles were split and bleeding. Carmen didn't think. She just reacted. She grabbed a warm, damp towel from the bathroom and walked over to him. He sank onto the edge of the leather sofa, dropping his head into his hands. "You're bleeding," she whispered, gently taking his heavy hand in hers and pressing the towel to his knuckles. Gabriel let out a ragged breath, leaning into her touch. He moved closer, wrapping his arms around her waist and burying his face in the soft curve of her stomach. It was an incredibly intimate, vulnerable gesture from a man who had just orchestrated the collapse of a criminal empire. "It's almost over," he murmured, his voice a gravelly vibration against her skin. "Nikolai is bleeding cash and men. He has agreed to a final parley, tomorrow night, an old abandoned rail yard on the south side." Carmen's hands stilled in his dark hair. "A parley? It's a trap, Gabriel. He has nothing left to lose." "I know," Gabriel said, looking up at her. The primal, protective instinct in his eyes was blinding. "He expects me to walk into a crossfire. He expects me to leave you here, heavily guarded." "Then what are we going to do?" she asked, the "we" slipping out naturally. She was no longer a waitress from Pilsen. She was the mate to the apex predator of Chicago. Gabriel's lips curved into a dark, devastating smile. "We are going to give him exactly what he wants, and then we are going to bury him." The abandoned rail yard on the south side was a graveyard of rusting steel and shattered glass. The freezing wind howled through the skeletal remains of old freight cars, carrying the scent of snow and decaying metal. Nikolai Volkov stood in the center of the clearing, surrounded by 20 heavily armed mercenaries. The Russian boss looked haggard, his normally immaculate silver hair disheveled, his ice-blue eyes manic with desperation. His empire had been dismantled in less than 3 days. He needed a kill, and he needed it tonight. Headlights cut through the darkness. A single black SUV rolled into the yard, coming to a halt 20 yards from Nikolai's men. The driver's door opened, and Gabriel stepped out. He was alone. No Stellan. No backup. Just one man walking into a firing squad. Nikolai let out a harsh, barking laugh. "You arrogant fool! You actually came alone! The great Gabriel Moreau, blinded by his own myth!" Gabriel stopped 10 paces away, his hands resting casually in the pockets of his long black wool coat. "You wanted a parley, Nikolai. I'm here. Concede the city. Take your remaining men, and leave Chicago tonight. If you do, I let you live." "You let me live?" Nikolai spat, raising a hand. His men instantly raised their assault rifles, laser sights painting Gabriel's chest in a dozen red dots. "You burned my businesses. You froze my accounts. I am going to fill you with lead, and then my men are going to visit that underground bunker and retrieve your little waitress. We will see how loud she screams when—" "I wouldn't make promises you can't keep, Nikolai," a crisp female voice rang out from the shadows. Nikolai froze. From the rusted catwalk of a towering, defunct crane, directly above the Russian boss, a figure emerged. It was Carmen. She was dressed in black tactical gear, her dark hair pulled back in a tight braid, and resting on the steel railing, aimed directly at Nikolai's skull, was a high-powered, suppressed sniper rifle. "What is this?" Nikolai snarled, taking a step back. "This is karma," Carmen said, her voice amplified by the dead silence of the rail yard. "You arrogant men always make the same mistake. You look at a woman in a red dress and you see a liability. You look at a waitress and you see prey. You never stopped to consider that while Gabriel was pretending to be distracted by me, he was actually teaching me how to shoot." Gabriel didn't move a muscle, but a low, dark chuckle vibrated in his chest. He looked up at her with a mixture of absolute pride and fierce devotion. "Kill her!" Nikolai screamed, pointing up at the catwalk. But before a single Russian mercenary could pull a trigger, the shadows around the rail yard came alive. Gabriel hadn't come alone. His men, the elite, silent hunters of his inner circle, had been in position for an hour, blending into the darkness like a pack of wolves waiting for the Alpha's signal. Suppressed gunfire erupted with terrifying precision. It wasn't a battle. It was an execution. Within 10 seconds, Nikolai's entire mercenary squad was on the ground, incapacitated or disarmed. Stellan Mercer stepped out from behind a rusted shipping container, pressing the barrel of a shotgun against the back of Nikolai's knees, forcing the Russian boss to the freezing gravel. Gabriel walked slowly toward Nikolai, the crunch of his boots on the stones sounding like a death knell. He looked down at the ruined man. "You threatened my city. You threatened a civilian's brother," Gabriel said, his voice terrifyingly calm. He glanced up at the catwalk. "But your biggest mistake was underestimating her." Carmen lowered the rifle and made her way down the rusted stairs, stepping into the clearing. She walked right up to Nikolai, looking down at the man who had ordered her brother's mutilation and threatened to sell her into a nightmare. "Tell the Volkov Bratva in New York that Chicago is closed," Carmen said coldly. Gabriel drew a sleek, suppressed pistol from his coat, pressing it to Nikolai's forehead. "You have 30 seconds to crawl to a vehicle and leave my city. If I ever see your face in this zip code again, I won't be so merciful." He struck Nikolai hard across the temple with the heavy grip of the gun, dropping the Russian boss into the dirt. The war was over. The apex predators had won. An hour later, back in the warmth of the penthouse office at Moreau Holdings, Gabriel poured 2 glasses of the same 62 Barolo that had started this entire chaotic journey. He handed one to Carmen, their fingers brushing. "Your brother lands in Chicago tomorrow morning. His debts are cleared, and his rehab is fully funded," Gabriel said softly. He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a crisp, heavy cashier's check. He slid it across the mahogany desk. $2 million, as promised. "Your slate is clean, Carmen. You can go anywhere, do anything." Carmen looked at the check. It was everything she had ever dreamed of. It was an escape from the grind, from the fear, from the freezing Pilsen apartment. Slowly, she picked up the piece of paper. Gabriel's jaw clenched, a flash of undeniable agony crossing his dark eyes as he braced himself for her to walk out the door. Instead, Carmen gripped the edges of the check and tore it cleanly in half. Gabriel's breath hitched. "What are you doing?" $2 million is a lot of money," Carmen said, stepping around the desk and closing the distance between them. She dropped the torn pieces into his wastebasket. "But it's severance pay, and I don't want to be severed from you." Gabriel stared at her, the mask of the ruthless Mafia boss completely shattering. He reached out, his large hands gripping her waist, pulling her flush against his chest. "Do you have any idea what you're choosing?" he whispered, his voice ragged, his forehead dropping to rest against hers. "This life is blood and shadows. I am a monster to the rest of the world." "You're not a monster to me," Carmen breathed, reaching up to tangle her fingers in his dark hair. "You're the man who gave me my power back. I don't want a quiet life, Gabriel. I want this one. With you." With a low, feral growl, Gabriel crushed his mouth against hers. It was a kiss fueled by weeks of terrifying danger, unspoken obsession, and primal claiming. He kissed her like a man dying of thirst, lifting her effortlessly off the ground, sealing their fate. The desperate waitress hadn't just survived the underworld. She had conquered its king. Can you believe the sheer audacity of this story? From a spilled bottle of wine to a full-blown underworld war, Carmen's journey from a desperate minimum-wage waitress to the fierce, untouchable queen of the Chicago syndicate proves that sometimes the biggest risks yield the ultimate rewards. She didn't just stand up to a Mafia boss. She became his absolute equal, turning the tables on every single man who ever doubted her. If this intense, high-stakes story of hard karma, primal loyalty, and dangerous romance kept you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button right now. Don't forget to share this video with your friends who love a jaw-dropping plot twist, and hit subscribe to join our channel for more incredible, true-to-life, dramatic stories. What would you have done in Carmen's shoes? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next video.